The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. See it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the sixth day, almost finished with the sixth day actually, of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in June 2023. And I'd like to share some more of Obaku's teachings. Obaku is his name in Chinese, and the Japanese pronunciation of those very same Chinese characters, that's his name in Japanese. The Chinese reading of those characters is Huangpo. And you've heard of Huangpo many times in these talks. Huangpo was a very, very deeply enlightened Chinese Chan master. Chan, as you know, is the pronunciation, although I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it exactly correctly. That was how the Chinese pronounced jhana, which was the original word for meditation. And of course, that got changed into Zen in Japan and Son in Korea. And first, I'd like to point out that there is somehow that's attached. There we go. A book I highly recommend. This is called A Bird in Flight Leaves No Traces. A Bird in Flight Leaves No Traces. When Harada-roshi spoke about realizing all he had to do was simply receive, no coloration to it, no need to judge it, simply to receive with what can be known as radical acceptance, whatever came to him. And this also speaks to that same mind state. This book was written by a contemporary Son master, Subal Sanim, who is fluent in English and has recently established his first American outpost in Los Angeles. He's a friend of Robert Buswell's. Robert was a monk at the temple, a Son temple, a very highly regarded Son temple in Korea for a number of years. He is now a professor, and has been for some time, Professor Emeritus, I think it is, at ZCLA, at Los Angeles, UCLA. And he has helped or worked with Subal Sanim on translating this and has written the foreword to this book. Robert Buswell is an eminent translator of Korean Son teachings, just as there are a couple of eminent translators of Japanese Zen teachings, including Norman Waddell and Burton Watson. When you look into reading a book about Zen or Son or Chan, it's important for you to observe who the translator of this book is. And most importantly, are they a person who practices Zen? And in the case of Norman Waddell, it's as if he's become Hakuin. He's translated so much Hakuin and really seems to get the personality of the man who lived several centuries before. And so I highly recommend any works on Zen that are translated by Norman Waddell. Burton Watson is a bit older, and he has not translated quite as much. So, again, I very much recommend this book. It is written by Son Master Subil and translated by Robert E. Buswell, and a Korean person, Song Uk Kim. It's a fairly recent book. It was, I think, published in the last few years. So again, and I don't know if it's available on Kindle, this happens to be a hardcover book. In this book, Subal Sanim is sharing and commenting on Huangbo's teaching, Obaku's teaching. Obaku, as you remember, was the teacher of Rinzai. So there's a flavor there. And let me first share something. One of the comments that is shared by Robert Buswell of Subal Sanim's in the introduction: once you have a breakthrough in your training, you will be able to believe these words and leave things just as they are, whether things go your way or not. If you let them take their natural course, one day everything will be revealed accordingly. As time passes, things mature and naturally reveal themselves. If you have already recognized the original quiescence inherent in your mind, what more is there for you to be concerned about? What more is there to be concerned about? And that is the same as what Harada-roshi said. I realized all I need to do is simply to receive. We tend to get ourselves in trouble and in some level of dukkha, whether it's just discomfort or actual pain and suffering. When we hear something, we see something, something happens to us, and immediately we judge it. And out of that judgment flows reactivity. And we go chasing after attempts to be free. We go chasing after attempts to hang on to whatever it is that has come, even though its time may have dissolved. And so we find ourselves going back and forth and all around, trying to have things the way we want them to be. Whereas if we simply receive, and from a very deep place, experience the moment as it appears to be, tuning into our body and feeling the felt sense, then there is freedom that naturally comes forth when we can fully tune in. And that takes a certain amount of practice. Zen practice offers us the tools through which to reach that place of true letting go. And the extended out-breath is foremost about these. Simply to extend the breath naturally and not to push it, but when it gets to a point where you would automatically breathe back in, then to push it a little bit further out to the point where what happens is there's a narrowing of focus, a deepening of presence with the physical experience of that breath. Now, it can take a while before you do actually have the ability to tune into that physical experience. For many people in our daily lives and coming out of our conditioning, we don't want to feel what's going on in our bodies. We have used escape into our head, into intellect, into ideas, into thoughts about what's going on, particularly if it's challenging or uncomfortable. And that just results in around and around and around and around and around and around and around, like a dog chasing its tail. And we get stuck in these mind states for sometimes weeks, years, sometimes, unfortunately, for a whole lifetime. The whole thing with the generational, continuing down the generations, battles between the Hatfields and the McCoys is infamous. And there are many cultures in which if someone is injured or killed or insulted by somebody else, then the battle begins, and it continues down until somebody just chooses to let it go. I remember when I was 19, 20 years old, being aghast that I would get angry about something. I don't even remember what. And it would go around and around for weeks. And I kept thinking, how can I get off this? I don't like feeling angry all the time. And it doesn't make any sense either. It's uncomfortable. It interrupts any other involvement. And it colors our life in rather unpleasant ways. Now, that said, much later in my life, I began to realize that I was actually holding an anger which was really legitimate based on what I had experienced when I was much younger. And I had not processed it at the time of these experiences. And therefore, it got stuck in my body in sensation. And it would come up, and it was partly responsible for these around and around and around again periods of extended anger. Once I was able to let myself tune in to the energy of anger, then when I got to a point where I could tune into the deepest point, which means then you're fully tuned in. And it took time, because I didn't even realize I was angry at first. But as I gradually began to realize this, then there was a huge resistance to actually feeling the energy of the anger, because I did not want to be like what had happened to me when I was a child. I didn't want to pass that along, and I felt that it had come out of anger from the person or people that were fomenting it. And so the last thing I wanted to do was be like them. And so I had quashed any recognition of any energy of anger. The irony of it was that people around me could feel that energy, even though I couldn't. So when I finally got to a point where I was able to really tune in and recognize the legitimacy of the past experiences that produced the anger, and that they were past, and I didn't need to continue it along, then I was able to begin letting it go. And to begin letting it go was initially to just tune into my body and feel, or try to feel. And as I said, it was quite difficult in the beginning. And gradually, as I persisted, and this is what is essential for any discomfort in our bodies, if we have trained ourselves over decades often to not feel those uncomfortable feelings. But if we are able to tune in to the point where we actually feel them fully, then there is a sense of dissolution of those energies. It's like they are no longer powerful. They're no longer stuck in our bodies. And from that moment on, whenever something like anger, sadness, upset of some sort comes up, when we tune into our bodies, which is the hardest part of this, then the more completely we can tune in, that stuck place in our body is released, and we are free from the tyranny of it, free from its ability to drive our reactions behind the scenes, free from the ability of that reaction to skew our perceptions. It's quite amazing, but it requires tuning in. And that goes right against what we don't want to do, because we don't want to feel those feelings, because they are painful, frightening, anger-producing. Yet, if you are to be truly free, to simply receive what comes forth and be able to simply be with it and allow the karma to play out. Now, this doesn't mean that you just sit back and kind of hang out watching the show. It means that in receiving, there is such clarity and no caughtness when you've reached that point. And this is the place where Obaku is pointing to. This is the place where Subal Sanim is pointing to. Then there's no felt need to react. However, what will happen instead is a sense of it's time to simply wait, or there will be a sense of, okay, this is how to proceed, to clearly work with it. So it's an active place of working with it. It's not just sitting back. You know, we think receiving just means, okay, you accept this even if it's burning your hands off. No, you accept it, tune in, fully accept it, and then the natural, appropriate response it becomes obvious. And it's not a reactivity, it is a response. So when Subal Sanim says, oops, attach this. Once you have broken through in your training, you will be able to believe these words and leave things just as they are. Whether things go away or not, if you let things take their natural course, one day everything will be revealed accordingly. As time passes, things mature naturally and reveal themselves. If you have already recognized the original quiescence inherent in your mind, what more is there for you to be concerned about? It's difficult, you know, words are insufficient. It's difficult to express the freedom that allows. And again, I have to emphasize that it doesn't mean that you're just hanging back and just being willy-nilly. It means that you are so present that naturally, if there's a need to respond to whatever it is, you naturally respond in a clear and deep way. And often the thing resolves. You've heard in various teishos of different expressions of this. I think of Harada-roshi when he was still a monk at Shofukuji in Kobe and was leading a work party outside the main gate, but he was still on the property of the temple. And a man who seemed to be the leader of the homeless people that were sitting on the property, they were occupying the property, and they felt that the temple was cheating them out of water, which is an odd thing to comprehend in Japan, where there is so much water. And so the man, who was described as no stranger to violence, came and stood right, almost nose to nose with Harada, and was screaming at him, demanding, and potentially violent, to the point where the person that told me this story hung on to the shovel he had been using in his work there in case he needed to whack the guy if he took a swipe at Harada. Well, what happened was Harada simply received the man's rage, simply received the energy, and because he was so fully present, because he was simply receiving, it went right through him. It registered, of course, but his response was to simply get more and more and more quiet. And gradually, the man tuned into that, and his level of rage diminished to the point where they could actually quietly come to some resolution over the problem. Now, that was in that particular instance. We can use that as a model up to a certain point. But there are times when tuning in, being present, receiving, means to act in a different way. For example, there was an elderly woman who was walking down the steps into the subway station in New York City, and she suddenly heard rapid footsteps behind her. She turned around, and there were two young thugs pursuing her, actually. And she turned around and she stood her place and said, "What do you want?" And they turned around and ran back upstairs. So there's no specific way that you need to react or respond to situations. But when you are so present with the situation that you're simply receiving the experience, naturally you will understand how to respond, whether to respond, what to do. And it'll be very clear to you, and it will be able to be accomplished without any rage, any self-doubt. It will simply come forth. So Subal Sanim, as I said, is sharing and commenting on the talks by the teachings by Obaku, by Huangbo. And this chapter is titled, "Realize the One Mind and You Will Be Buddha." Actually, you're already Buddha, but it's kind of covered up by conditioning, by assumptions about yourself and life and your relationship with others. It's interesting, I was reading about the explorations they've been doing into the sudden increase in gun sales in America. And they were trying to figure out why, what was fueling it. And one of the things they did was an experiment, a number of different experiments actually, in which they gave college students, some college students had just something like a spatula, a cooking utensil, and others had a model gun. It was a gun, actual gun without any firing capacity. And they had them watch videos. They had them watch just simple sights like a shoe or whatever. And they found very interesting results. And that was when people were holding the gun, two things happened. One is that they could mistake a shoe, for example, for somebody else holding a gun. Another is that they were more likely to mimic shooting the gun if there was somebody with a turban on in the picture. And the other thing is that they were very slow to react. The people that were holding the spatula had much less reactivity. The people holding the gun seemed to have this sense that they had a weapon and they could use it to protect themselves. Now, this is just a random group of college students, some of which came from families that owned guns, and those are the ones that were given the fake gun. The families that were in the students that were from families that did not own guns had the spatula. And it was the ones who had owned guns that were so rapid to react with the gun, although more slowly than otherwise. And this is an interesting point, too. People think that they are more protected if they have a gun. They think that they can shoot somebody who threatens them. First of all, people who have guns tend to assume that they need to protect themselves, and that it has been shown that they have a view of the world as dangerous, as people untrustworthy, and so they're more inclined to shoot. Yet, they're slower to be able to pull the trigger. What does that mean? If there really is someone with a gun or a knife in front of them, that person will be able to shoot faster than the person who thinks he's defending himself will be able to use his own gun. This has been proven over and over and over again. Our perceptions drive our reactivity. Our perceptions depend on our history, our conditioning around that history, which drives our assumptions about ourselves and about others. To become free from this is what Obaku is speaking to. And let's share. Huangpo's court reporter was a senior government official and longtime Buddhist practitioner named Teisho. He's the one that wrote down what Obaku said. All the Buddhas, okay, so it starts with, the master said to me, and that's Teisho, all the Buddhas and sentient beings are only the one mind. There is no other Dharma. Since time immemorial, the mind has never been produced or extinguished. Your original face was never born, and it can never die. Yet it is the most fundamental beingness. Whether you are covered up with assumptions about yourself or not. And as you do your Zen practice, you can begin to see through your assumptions and begin to thin out this self-image to the point where you see through it more and more and become more and more free to where you begin to see the clarity that is your own mind without the hindrance of these overlays of self-image, of assumptions, of conditioning. So it's always there. You don't have to find it. You don't have to make it. It's simply more letting go where you're caught. And in order to do that, you need to see where you're caught, because you can't let go where you're caught unless you recognize where you're caught. And then you let go where you're caught by seeing through it, recognizing it as false, and becoming more free as a result of that recognition. And as we do the extended out breath, that's what begins to happen. If we do it fully enough, if we tune in fully enough to our body as we are extending that out breath to the point where other things, thoughts, ideas, and so on, simply disappear in this increasing focus and awareness, it naturally begins to happen. Patience is very important in this progress. So is faith. Faith that you actually can accomplish this. You can see through where you're caught sufficiently that you can experience who you really are. And of course, faith that there's some way in which you can do that that is not through thought, is not through ideas, is not through constructions of vignettes, is not through analysis, because our true nature is not something that can be gotten hold of. Since time immemorial, this mind has never been produced or extinguished. It is neither green nor yellow. It has neither form nor characteristics. It does not belong to a category of either existence or non-existence. It cannot be measured in terms of new or old, long or short, large or small. It transcends all limits. And if it has no limits, you can't reach out and grab hold of it. However, as you sink into simply being, it begins to be revealed to you, not as a thing, not as substance, but clearly as a profound truth. It transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. What is right in front of you, that is it. But if you start to think, you'll be off the mark. So on the 6th day of Sesshin, we've had a lot of instruction in how to reach this absolute freedom that is built in within you. And hopefully you recognize that it's going to take a while. I remember John, and I don't remember what his last name was anymore, an art teacher who lived in Buffalo and came to every Sesshin in the summer to Rochester, and every single Sunday morning sitting, which included teisho and zazen, for years and years and years and years and years. And he told me one day that he began to get discouraged when he'd been going to Doksan for 13 years and still hadn't had a kensho experience. And he walked into Doksan and sat down and bemoaned to Roshi Kaplo, "I've been practicing for 13 years. And he doesn't remember anything more when Roshi said, 13 years, 30 years? Suddenly it no longer mattered to him, which was actually a move forward. After he had been practicing for 20 years, he had a very deep kensho experience. It was transformative. So no longer, and no matter how long it can take to have insight, keep the faith that if you keep going, it will happen. There's no question about it. There was another person, an older woman, whose husband actually was practicing as well at the Rochester Zen Center, and eventually became a Zen teacher himself. And she was also getting frustrated. She'd been practicing 14 years. So Roshi had her give a talk in the Zendo. There were various different kinds of talks. There were Dharma talks by senior people, and there were teishos by the Roshi. And then there were talks that the Roshi had people give that would have responses from the Sangha with the idea that things might be pointed out to them that they had missed, and it might help deepen their practice. So she was, again, lamenting, 14 years. And she said, can't somebody push my button? Well, about 2 sesshin later, I was sitting in the Zendo when she was also in the Zendo. And she went up to Doksan, came down from Doksan, having passed her koan, and she said out loud, without realizing it, in the Zendo, only 14 years. Only 14 years. No matter how long it takes. And again, I need to caution that having a single kensho is only a beginning. To continue on and deepen further is absolutely essential if we're truly to become free. An initial kensho will let us see a little bit more deeply. Kala Rinpoche likened it to a flash of lightning in a dark night, saying that it was like you were climbing up a path in the mountain, unfamiliar to you, and it was pitch black dark, so you couldn't see where you were going. You were stumbling along, and then suddenly there's a flash of lightning, and you can see the path ahead of you, briefly. Now you know where you're going. Now you can proceed with greater confidence. And proceed is what hopefully we'll do, to deeper and deeper and deeper insights and kensho experiences. As you've heard before, the great Zen master Hakuin, 18th century renewer of Rinzai Zen in Japan, said he had 19 major kensho experiences and countless minor ones. That should be our model. This life is short. The deeper we can go in that short time, the freer we can become in that short time will be transformative, and not just to ourselves, but as you heard in, I think it was the first teisho in this sesshin, liberating all sentient beings, liberating the stuck places in our mind, actually continues to liberate others throughout space and time. People who are caught in experiencing the mind state, which they will naturally do through mirror images, which can extend far and wide. Other people will also be liberated. It depends, of course, on how open they are, but still, it happens. There are many examples of this as well. Simply the transformation of Frankie Parker in that prison on death row, and how he was able to positively affect the lives of other prisoners. And I don't doubt that Harada-roshi, when he encountered that enraged homeless man, was able to affect in some ways, positive ways, that man, who in turn would be affecting in positive ways, less enraged ways, the people he was leading. As we become more and more free ourselves, our experiences will change. It's guaranteed. So, I hope you're in for it in the long haul. because that is really what's required. And that is what will really bring incredible benefit to you and to all beings. No matter whether you know them or not, no matter whether you've ever come in contact with them or not, it will make a significant difference. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.